All right, good morning, everyone. Here we are. Welcome to day 5 of TCC MakerCon 2020. I'm Andrew Stroshine. I'll be monitoring the Q&A window, and I'll be sharing your questions and comments. We do want you to speak up during the event using the Q&A window, but there won't be a way for you to share your mic or camera. So just type your questions into the window or your comments, and I'll be sharing them with the presenter as we go along. Or we also will have a question and answer session. Hopefully at the end, we'll have time to do a lot of questions and answers there. If you're having difficulties with the technology or connecting, please do email Danelle and she will help you. We're also providing ASL interpreters via the link found on that MakerCon schedule. We're recording all of our sessions this week, including this one, and as an attendee, you'll be able to participate in the ongoing conversations. It is the final day of presentations today, but we hope the conversations and the teamwork will continue beyond this. Make sure to join us at 2 p.m. for our closing event, a networking activity where we'll close the sessions out and we will announce the winner of our appathon. So we've had some people this week participating in our contest to build an app, and we'll be announcing the winners of that. Today, we have a really interesting, exciting session for all makers, everybody who's interested in creating their own content, products, whatever it is. We're talking today about intellectual property, how makers can protect their projects. With us today, we have Jelani Odlum, who's a project manager for the Michelson Institute, and she'll be giving us a really wonderful presentation. Jelani. Oh, Jelani, I think you're muted.
I was muted. Yeah. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you at TCC MakerCon. And my colleague, Rochelle Malumba, is also on the line. She's a program coordinator with our initiative, so you can say hi as well, Rochelle.
Good morning, everyone. Nice meeting you.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about intellectual property resources that we've developed. We are with the Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property, and it's an initiative of the Michelson 20mm Foundation. We're a private family foundation based in Los Angeles. And our mission with this initiative is really to help provide access to IP education for budding inventors and entrepreneurs, and of course makers. And so this is a nonprofit initiative. We've been going strong for a few years now, and yeah, really excited to share a little bit about how some of these materials can be used to help with your student makers. So we'll move on to just looking at the agenda for today. We'll tell you a little bit about our background. We'll talk about some essentials for makers to understand. So things like Makerspace Ip Policy, fair use and infringement, Creative Commons licenses, patent rights, and then we'll go on to kind of speak to the resources that we have available and how those can be utilized. We'll also have a quick demo of our portal, and we'll move on to Q&A, but we can also keep it casual and have Q&A throughout as well. So a little bit about our founder, so you learn a little bit more about the background of the initiative. Our founder is Dr. Gary K. Michelson. He is a prolific inventor in the medical space, considered one of the most prolific inventors in all of medical history, nearly 1,000 patents to his name. And, he was an orthopedic spinal surgeon and turned to innovation in the pursuit to help his patients manage their pain. Today, he's a philanthropist. He's retired from the medical field, but he has gone on to sign the Giving Pledge, which is a pledge of some of the world's wealthiest individuals to give away at least half of their wealth during their lifetime. And so this education foundation is one of many of his foundations, but as an innovator himself, as an inventor himself, this initiative, I'd say, is really close to his heart, and he really has a passion for helping spread that knowledge to the next generation of inventors. So that's a little bit about our background. So just to go on and speak to IP and how it's functioning today in our new digital economy. So today we see that that IP industries generate 38% of US GDP, and the market value of all publicly traded companies in the US, 80% of that is now in IP. So there's been this, this really big shift over the past 60 plus years from previously the value of companies and corporations was in their physical assets, their manufacturing, resources, things of that nature. And that is really completely flipped to 80% of that is in intangible intellectual property assets. So today we see that IP is really the principal driver of corporate value and of national economic growth. So next, we have some other stats that we, at this initiative, we decided to focus on. 4% of US patents were issued to women or teams of women in the last decade. When we look at mixed teams, it's only 21% of patents are issued to mixed teams. So there's a massive, massive gender opportunity gap in this space. Including more women and African Americans in the initial stage of the process innovation was found that it could increase annual GDP by nearly $100 billion. So bringing in more diverse groups into the innovation process, in all ways that looks, that's a huge opportunity that we really want to focus on. And then finally, 49% of millennials intend to start a business within 3 years. So that's also staggering just to think about this generation and also the rising generation coming up after Gen Z. And this is a really entrepreneurial group. And so looking at the opportunity gaps, but then also looking at what in terms of entrepreneurship, many of the rising generation is looking towards. So that's another thing that we're really excited about, and we think intellectual property can really help them in their businesses and their pursuits. So first off, just a little bit about Makerspace IP Policy. Makers should be aware if they are or if they are not the legal owners of their creation. And so I think it would be a good idea for TCC. I understand that you're building out new maker programs and hope to build a collection of new maker spaces. I think this is a great idea to maybe have a makerspace policy available to share with students, or maybe maker agreement that also, speaks a little bit, or maybe has an IP section. Generally, colleges, community colleges, it's very unlikely that there would be any sort of IP agenda, but it's just really useful for the students to kind of understand that and just know right off the bat that the things that they're creating, that their projects, things they're working on are actually theirs, and they are the owners and the authors of those creations. The next thing that, makers and creators that are using the makerspace should understand about IP would be concepts of fair use and infringement. So you see here, fair use is a legal doctrine that promotes freedom of expression by permitting the unlicensed use of copyright protected works in certain circumstances. And so essentially there is a concept in copyright law that's called fair use that states that if a copyrighted work is being used, but that use is non-commercial in nature, and it's educational in nature, then that's fair use and it's okay to utilize that copyrighted work. So a makerspace example could be that a student, they find a copyrighted image online they really like, maybe they tweak it a bit in Illustrator, and then, laser cut it onto a piece of wood. So is that copyright infringement? It probably is not, because this is arguably educational in nature. They're, learning how to create this new laser cut design, and they're not, going to go off and try to make a profit of what their creation is. It just maybe sits on their desk. So that's okay. but where it could move into infringement is if they decide, actually, this is so great, I'm going to go on and try to sell this and make a profit across campus or with friends and family. So that is an area where we could see some infringement happening for the maker space. A great way to, avoid this altogether would just be making sure that they're using images that are in the, can we go back? Yeah. Images in the public domain. So just using Google image search, there is an image usage rights little tool that you can use. And if you select images in the public domain, you're free. Your makers are free to use that however they'd like. Similar concept in copyright law. Let's say a maker, gets a trademarked logo and they try to print that. Let's say they print it onto a t-shirt, and they're just wearing it for, their own use. That's fine. That shouldn't be infringement. Where it could lead into infringement is if they print this new t-shirt, they have this trademarked logo, and then they are trying to sell that for a profit, or even they're using it to promote an event, let's say on campus. That would be in the space of infringement. So those are just a couple of examples around fair use infringement, and very useful, I think, for makers just to understand what the lines and boundaries are there. And then we can move on. So Creative Commons, I think this is a really useful tool for and a really useful organization for makers to be aware of. Essentially, they're a nonprofit that wants to promote the sharing, the free sharing and collaboration. And so they have created a set of free legal tools that essentially help creators to, share certain usage rights with the public, but then also retain certain rights for themselves. And so, let's say one of your makers develops this cool new gadget and they want to be accredited for it. Maybe they want to showcase it in their portfolio, but at the same time, they want to allow others to also improve, iterate upon it. So, maybe they protect it under Creative Commons license. I'd say we know a lot of folks in this space turn to, Kickstarter or other sort of crowdfunding programs. And in those cases, usually it would be a good idea to have a Creative Commons license along with the work that they're promoting or that they're trying to get funding for on any of the crowdfunding tools, so that they can make sure they retain some of those rights, but then also they want to freely promote their audience to use those creations as well. So that would be another example of the Creative Commons. I think this is a really, really great tool. We actually have our curriculum that I'll speak to in a little bit is protected under Creative Commons. And we have a little bit of one of the more restrictive licenses, I would say, because our materials are a legal topic in nature. And so we don't want to allow too much remixing to the point where the content maybe is not legally sound. And so that's why we have a little bit more of a restrictive CC license, but there are very open CC licenses. There's a whole gamut. On the website, there's a license chooser tool that's really useful for folks to check out. So next up, I have a quick video.
We have Jelani. Actually, if I could jump in real quickly, we have a question from the audience where someone asks, let's say I create a handmade accessories box for sale, which I allow personalization on. If the buyer provides me to add a logo that he asked and paid for a designer to design, does it count as infringement for me to add that other person's logo?
That doesn't sound like infringement, but I'm also not an attorney, so you'd want to probably, actually, you might be able to use some of our resources to look into that, or maybe consult an attorney. But I don't think that sounds like infringement since you have permission from the owner of the design.
Yes, it kind of sounds like I guess there's a chain of chain of provenance or chain of licensing where the designer sold the logo to your buyer, and then your buyer is providing you that logo. So it's kind of like a chain of custody situation.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. But yes, I'm not an attorney, so I can't answer questions that are super legal, but I can definitely speak to the resources and where you might be able to find some of that information.
Okay,
but thanks for the question. And so we are going to play a quick clip from, this is actually from our online course, which we will speak a little bit more about in a moment. And yeah, we can go ahead and play this. It's just about the Creative Commons.
Why might an author be interested in alternatives to traditional copyrights? Traditional copyright typically applies to authors who pursue some sort of monetary gain in exchange for the use of their creative work, as well to authors who want to prevent unauthorized access to or alteration of the work. But what if an author simply wants to get his work out to the broadest possible readership and monetary gain is not an issue? And what if an author would welcome additions or improvements to the original work? In these cases, there are new kinds of copyright licenses that creators may employ. What is Creative Commons? Creative Commons is a voluntary private sector alternative to traditional copyright. It coordinates the creation and consumption of content among a wide variety of individuals and institutions, all without any government intervention. Creative Commons is useful to creators who seek broad dissemination of content and not necessarily financial gain. These uses are not as effectively served by either traditional copyright or the public domain. The Creative Commons license is currently available in 6 flavors. Attribution, or CC BY. CC BY is the most liberal license. It allows others to change.
Okay, great. We can move on from there. So that video just goes on to present the other CC BY licenses and speak a little bit more about when and how to utilize Creative Commons. So now on to patent rights and public disclosure. So a patent gives a patent holder the right to exclude others from making, from using, from importing, and selling a patented device. So essentially a patent is a property right, just like any other property rights. I do want to acknowledge that many in the maker community may not be interested in patenting their creations, and that's completely okay. We as an organization, our goal isn't to get more creators to file for patents or anything like that, but we do think it's really useful education for folks in this space to have. So I just want to mention a few areas that might come up as potential issues if you do have makers that are working on projects that, potentially at some point down the road, they think that they really struck upon something and it might be something they'd like to patent. So one of those issues is just around the sharing of ideas and advice and collaboration that happens in the makerspace. Sometimes that can lead to concerns around whether the innovation was actually publicly disclosed, and there are rules around public disclosure that would negate patentability. So that's one area that comes up. Another could be, again, because of the collaborative nature and the collective problem solving, all the sorts of things that are happening in the makerspace, there could arise an issue of who the actual author is, and that needs to be solidified in order to apply for and receive a patent. And so I think it's just the collaborative environment, which is a wonderful thing, and that's an awesome environment which helps lead to innovation. But at the same time, there are a few things that might kind of get in the way if the creators are interested in looking towards a patent. So some ways that you might want to think about this or share this with your makers would be thinking about maybe the role of an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, maybe you know, a collaboration agreement or a partnership agreement among folks that are working on larger projects or, you know, more detailed projects that may arise. So yeah, those are a couple examples of things. And like I mentioned, you know, as an organization, we are not, our goal isn't to, you know, facilitate more patent applications, but we do see a lot of, you know, we do see a lot of benefit to the IP education, the patent education, and especially as we talked about those kind of opportunity gaps that are really massive in this space. We see a lot of potential in bringing diverse groups, underrepresented groups into the new economy, and certainly, you know, patent rights are a way to do that. So while it's not the primary goal, we understand of maker spaces and the maker community, I think this is really great education as well. So on that note, we have another video to share. This is coming from our Basics of IP video series. It's a 9-part video series that's on YouTube, and it really helps to kind of illuminate these concepts in a more, you know, dynamic way. So you can go ahead and play that.
Now, even if you've got a patent-eligible invention, you still have to meet 3 criteria to get one: novelty, utility, and non-obviousness. Novelty means that your invention must never have been previously patented, described in a patent application, written about, disclosed to the public, or offered for sale anywhere in the world. It's got to be brand new. But wait, what if you invent a faster-than-light warp drive? Does the novelty bar mean you can't patent it because it was disclosed on the TV show Star Trek 50 years ago? Actually, you can patent it because the TV show did not describe a warp drive in sufficient detail to enable someone skilled in the science of space propulsion to build it. So take heart, Star Trek fans. The second criteria is utility, which simply means that your invention must function as intended. The Patent Office used to deny patents to hair regrowing products because they didn't work and therefore lacked utility. But finally, someone invented a composition that really did regrow hair on a bald scalp, and patents have been issued for these products ever since. The final criteria is non-obviousness, whose meaning is, well, not exactly obvious. This is where inventors face their biggest hurdle with patent examiners. Say you invent a wheeled cart to move office supplies more easily between departments. If this is the first such wheeled office cart in history, you can get a patent for it. But if you then decide, hey, why not put those wheels on a chair, you won't get a patent for it. That's because combining 2 such widely known and available elements would be obvious to anyone skilled in the art of office furniture design. But things are not so obvious when it comes to inventing a camera phone. Even though it's composed of well-known and widely available components, combining the 2 did satisfy the requirement for non-obviousness because they became more than the sum of their parts and met a large and previously unfilled need in the marketplace. Remember, a patentable invention doesn't have to be a huge revolutionary breakthrough. In fact, the best inventions are often the little things, small advances that save people time, money, or hassle in their everyday lives.
Awesome. Okay, so we can move on. And I'm now going to share a little bit about some of the resources that we have available that you can share with your makers, you know, have available in the makerspace, integrate if you have a maker curriculum or programs or events, you can integrate these. And so this is just we'll now talk about what's available to you. The first thing I will mention is that everything is freely available. Everything is openly licensed, like I mentioned earlier. Our activities are underwritten by the foundation. And so this just kind of goes back to our commitment as a foundation to open educational resources, and also just wanting to make sure that this really essential education can get to as many audiences as possible. So the first resource we have here is our digital IP textbook called The Intangible Advantage. And it was a one of our first efforts as an initiative was to create this resource. We worked with some of the brightest minds in the field of intellectual property. A former U.S. Patent and Trademark Office director was our executive editor, and a lot of other folks in the intellectual property space and innovation space helped us to create it. And it's really, really useful in that it was particularly meant as a resource to support undergraduate students and not soon-to-be patent attorneys or legal practitioners. So there's really no legal jargon or legalese. It's meant for undergraduate students, for budding inventors, for budding entrepreneurs, super easy to understand. It's very interactive. The video series is embedded throughout. There are sort of check your understanding questions, and other links to resources that they can go to for even more in-depth understanding of topic areas. So this covers all the fundamentals, patents, copyright, trademarks, trade secrets. And yeah, it's a really great resource. It's available on our website. We have a few different formats, both fully digital ebook on Apple Books or even a PDF if that works better. So yeah, highly encourage you to check that out on our website, michelsonip.com. And then next, another great resource that we've created is an online course that is on the Udemy platform. It's available for free on that platform, and it's called Intellectual Property Inventors, Entrepreneurs, Creators. So the goal of this curriculum is really to provide sort of a working fundamental knowledge of all areas of IP by the end of the course. So it's about 4 hours of content. It again has learning assessment a bit embedded throughout it, and it's a really great resource for students that maybe want to take a little bit of a deeper dive after watching that basics video series. Maybe they want to focus on one specific area like copyright or trademark, and they can dive into those sections. We've had over 17,000 learners really across educational backgrounds, contexts, individual lifelong learners take the course and have gotten great feedback. So it's another resource you can utilize. We also have links, direct links to the modules. And so you can embed these as well when you're doing presentations, when you maybe have a website or a content repository that you need more resources for. You can definitely go ahead and utilize those modules. Like I said, everything is kind of openly licensed for that purpose. And next, for those of you that might be interested in utilizing curriculum or seeing sort of what the curriculum looks like, we do have an Educator Portal. So we have the modules that are available to be downloaded directly into a learning management system like Canvas or Blackboard, PowerPoint presentations, which overview all the topic areas, an assessment bank, discussion questions. So I'd encourage all of you to sign up for an account, take a look at the resources. It's free, like I mentioned, michelsonip.com/teachip, and my colleague Rochelle will do a quick demo of what that looks like in a few moments. And the next, this is just an example of PowerPoint presentation that you can find. So for undergraduates, we have a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation and a 60-minute PowerPoint presentation. They're editable, so you can maybe put some of the slides or content into presentations that maybe you already have available, or you can just use the content as is. But yeah, it's a great resource for you in doing some of your basics, intro to IP presentations. And then finally, our blog is another great resource. We listen a lot to the feedback that we get, the questions that we get, and we work with attorneys to write blogs that are really easy to understand. Again, not that like legalese. So here are some examples of recent blogs. Can I copyright that? Everyday works to consider, or 3 things student innovators should know about IP. Another one, protecting your IP with an NDA. I think that's a great one for makers to take a look at. So yes, lots of great resources on the blog as well. And okay, so now we're going to do a demo of our Educator Portal and our website, so you can see kind of where to access the different links and resources that I spoke about. And then for that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Rochelle.
Hi, everyone. Just to reintroduce myself, my name is Rochelle. I'm a program coordinator with the Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property. And today, as Jelani said, I'm going to just be touching on, let me share my screen here first. I'm going to be touching on our Educator Portal and going through how you would access it and what to expect once you log on. So, Jelani, can you confirm if the screen is showing?
Yes, we can see
Yeah,
it.
that's great.
Thank you. Yes, so as Jelani said, you would go to michelsoNIP.com. And then once you get to michelsoNIP.com, you just go to our main menu bar here, and you would go to Educator Portal, and this is the page that it would take you to. So as you can see, we have a little bit of stats here, almost over 320 college universities, probably a little bit higher now, have been using our resources. And we have almost 25,000 students, entrepreneurs who have at least touched some of our resources. And so then you would scroll down here and you go to get your account today. And once you do that, you just fill out a simple form. It'll ask you your name, title, how you heard about us, which I guess in this case would be like a conference or an event. And once you fill that out, we will get a notification on our end, and I will then approve you to enter into the portal. So once you are approved, this is what the portal would look like on your end. So on this side, we have our Lms Course Modules, which Jelani mentioned earlier. And on this side, we have all of our additional materials that you would need to embed our curriculum. And so for our IP course modules, we have both for Canvas and Blackboard, as Jelani mentioned. And we have different tiers. So we have a full mode, a light mode, and an ultra light mode. So depending on, if you just need a touch and go, some touch and go resources to embed into your LMS site, or you need the full scope of all sort of the intellectual property topics, we have everything there in between. And we also have tutorials, video tutorials, in case you're new to uploading onto LMS for both Canvas and Blackboard as well, and other tutorials here as well. On our additional materials side, we have everything from reports to assessment banks and class presentations. We also have discussion questions, course outlines, and again, we have the ebook here, so that's easy to reach, our basics of IP video series, online course, our hot topics, which is sort of an offshoot of our blog. It's separate, but it sort of touches on a lot of the hottest issues in IP, sort of relevant issues that are going on. We have our intellectual property online course, and other video series available as well to download. We also have our Entrepreneur's Guide to IP, which is also a really great video series. We embedded our curriculum into a course at USC, and so this is the result of all sort of the lectures that went on that in that course during that semester. So this is kind of what you would see on the back end, and of course, if you have any questions, you would just email me here at Rochelle@20mm, and I should be able to help you as soon as possible. I don't know if there's any questions I should take maybe, or if there's any questions that people have. No? Okay, yeah, so that's all. That's the Educator Portal. It's really simple to download or to log into. All you have to do is get your account, and we should approve you as soon as possible. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, and so just one more think we'll mention here before going into the Q&A is that we have an upcoming event that is that's happening on November 12th, an Ask Me Anything session about intellectual property. So please, mark your calendar. This is a free event. We encourage everyone to attend, and you can share this with your students as well. But we have two great guest speakers that'll join us. Nicole Morris, who is the director of the Tiger program and a professor at the Emory University School of Law. She's awesome. She's a former patent attorney from Coca-Cola. And then also Louis Foreman, who is the CEO of product development firm called Inventus. And he is the executive producer of Everyday Edisons, which is sort of an everyday inventors reality show, which was available on PBS and is now moved to Crackle. So that should be a great session. We'll ask that anyone that registers just submit questions. You can also submit questions live, and they're both, a great knowledge, a knowledge resource around IP. So that's another event that we have coming up. And yeah, I think we can probably move on to Q&A if there are any questions.
Thank you, Jelani. One of the comments that we had kind of early on, that I think since a lot of the attendees to this particular event tend to be working in education in some way, and there are a fair number of library-related folks as well. Someone commented on the fact that introducing the idea of intellectual property can be a kind of a form of literacy in the same way we already do instruction on plagiarism when students are doing research, information literacy, knowing how to evaluate what they find online. Do you find that that kind of flows together well?
Intellectual property is literacy. I mean, I would agree with that. I think that we kind of feel as an initiative that, one of our goals is that intellectual property education is embedded, more in courses across disciplines. So we have found starting out that, of course, intellectual property is being taught in the law schools, generally in business school seminars, you'll see intellectual property, but, in the life sciences fields of that nature, but there is not a lot of education about it for folks that are, say, looking at marketing or looking at a career in business or the arts. And so one of the things that we worked with a lot in our partnership with the National Association for Community College Entrepreneurship is to develop this curriculum that's really modular. So it's not, patents for the life sciences, or it's not just focused on copyright law, but it's really modular across every vertical of intellectual property. And so it can be embedded really easily in many different forms and for many different topic areas. So yeah, I really agree. I think this is fundamental information for folks to have. And that's kind of, one of our kind of underlying missions is that this education gets out there for people that are not only in kind of the legal field, but really across disciplines. Yeah.
So with this curriculum that y'all have available, you've talked about spreading it across multiple disciplines, not just in what we think of as traditional legal or invention relating fields, but how young are we talking? There are so many K through 12 schools that have been introducing STEM and STEAM arts and engineering initiatives early in the last 10 years, trying to really bootstrap that development of kids early on. At what point do we really begin to introduce legal concepts to kids? And do you know of resources that are targeted at specific grade levels, maybe for K through 12?
Yeah, sure. So with our program, we really started out looking at the undergraduate space. Dr. Michelson is really passionate about kind of the intersection of like creativity and genius that happens as young, especially, in the college years, the traditional college years. So we started out developing curriculum for the undergraduate kind of space, but we had found that there are so many, like as you mentioned, there are so many rising programs that are speaking to STEM, speaking to entrepreneurship and invention at younger and younger levels. And so we have developed some resources, and we're working now on developing new ones that are a little bit more appropriate for that audience. But we have a few things. We have our PowerPoints. Some of those are specifically for a younger grade level. Our Basics of IP video series, I'd say, is very appropriate for younger grade levels. And we've started to build out new partnerships with groups that are kind of in the pathways space in specifically for high school. So Lemelson MIT program, the Thai Young Entrepreneurs, Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship. These are all groups that we're working with on sort of developing lesson plans and resources that go younger and younger. And I would say that, you know, there are, of course, ways to introduce IP to a younger audience. Another great resource is the USPTO themselves. I believe the site is uspto.gov/kids, and they have a lot of great materials for introducing IP from I think it's pre-K even through the high school years. So yeah, and there's also just really cool success stories that you can share with students to kind of get them excited about this topic as well. So there's a young inventor, I believe her name is Marissa Strang, and she developed this invention to kind of help more easily dry off her dog after giving her dog a bath. And she went on to receive a patent. And I think she was maybe in like 5th grade or around that age level. So there's a video that kind of, you know, showcases her story. And there are a lot of other resources like that at the USPTO site. And those are, I think, fun ways to really introduce the topic to younger audiences and let them know that, yeah, IP is for kids, and, you know, kids are innovating and creating, and they should learn how to protect and share those creations.
Wonderful. Tell us what kind of work needs to be done to expand the knowledge and excitement toward creating and inventing for gender, race, or cultural groups who, as you mentioned at the beginning, aren't necessarily as plugged into this part of the education system or the economy. How do we help them develop that potential? And if there are barriers, how do we sometimes get out of the way of the potential that they already have?
Yeah, that's a big question. I would say one thing that we've looked at is kind of the language and I guess the community around IP that that presents IP in a very sort of corporatized manner. So when we learn about IP, a lot of people think, oh, okay, trademarks, that's McDonald's, that's Coca-Cola. And they don't see IP is really could be for them. So, for example, in our video series, we have a case study about, you know, establishing trademark protection, and it shows an example of just a local, you know, community burger joint, and what happens when, you know, they have a trademark that they've developed, but they have, you know, maybe they're starting to expand to different cities, and they get some other, you know, business partners involved, and then the relationship goes sour. How do they protect their trademark when other business partners in, you know, a nearby city is also beginning to use the, you know, Bob Burger's trademark and things of that nature? So I think like bringing these concepts down a little bit to sort of, you know, small business, everyday entrepreneurs, everyday Edisons, as we might say, and how can, you know, small independent businesses and inventors and creators benefit from this system and learn about this this education, instead of it being sort of how does IP benefit, you know, Uber and Google. So that's one area I think that we're working on, is bringing some of those other stories to light, like the young lady I mentioned who patented this awesome invention for drying her dog, and things like that. So it's a lot of work to be done. There are quite a few groups that have popped up, even just in 2020 alone, to address some of these gaps. The USPTO has a new initiative. There are a few other initiatives that are going on to kind of regionally promote IP. There's this group, the Georgia IP Alliance. They're wonderful, and they've worked with other groups to pioneer sort of IP education at younger and younger levels. So one example would be like the Girl Scouts now has an IP badge as of a few years ago, and just incorporating these little pieces of IP into everyday examples and incorporating it so that people see how it's affecting their own lives and not just the big corporate players. So that would be some of the things that we kind of look to.
Interesting. Since you talked about bringing that down to the small business level or the community level, I'm curious, since you're a project manager, do you have any sense of, in your observations, what have you observed about creation as a process? Do you, I'm not. I really have a high admiration for project managers because I'm a worker. I like to be thrown at a problem and spend 10 hours just banging away at that problem and working on it. But the overall process to me is not as interesting. I would rather be fixing the individual things. So I find project managers really fascinating because it's such an interesting skill set. Do you see from that perspective as a project manager, have you seen any kind of consistent things that are missing maybe from individuals or small businesses who are trying to develop an innovation or maybe even bring a product to market?
I think from the perspective of a program manager, one of the things that we've noticed a lot, I guess it wouldn't be as much with individual businesses, but it's more about around our curriculum and like the uptake of our curriculum and who's comfortable teaching these topics and who's not. Like I mentioned, we work a lot with the National Association for Community College Entrepreneurship, and we have learned that a lot of educators do see a lot of value in this topic area, but then they don't feel that they're the right ones to teach to it. For example, there's like a lack of ease and a lack of comfortability teaching legal topics to students, which is understandable, but that's something that has been one of the things that we've kind of wanted to address and one of the gaps that we've sort of seen. So just creating curriculum and resources that make it easier for people to actually pick up and say, okay, I can like teach to this. I can be the first kind of layer to present these topics. And then maybe, we get an attorney or an IP specialist in to do a session, to do a panel, answer students' questions. But yeah, I guess one first level could just be getting folks and educators comfortable with the idea of presenting to these topics. So yeah, I don't know if that fully answered your questions, or if Rochelle, maybe you also have any thoughts to share.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think speaking on the project, I guess, management side, definitely, I think dealing with seeking out partnerships is something that I think we've done a really great job on the Michelson IP. Some of our partnerships with sort of the K through 12 space, and even with, for example, with NACI, we have sort of this IP educators and residents program that's sort of starting up, where we're we have a group of 5 educators that we are working with to sort of evangelize IP topics on campus, sort of through their own, using our resources and curriculum. And so I think definitely on the project management, incorporating that into this, I think partnerships have been a big part of how we've been able to sort of seek out partnerships, and also through our product offerings and trying to build on that, with our Educator Portal and our video offerings. We're also looking at increasing sort of the interactive activities that we offer for folks. So yeah, there's definitely different ways that we've been trying to incorporate sort of project management and partnerships into what we're doing.
Wonderful. Tell us a little bit more about the difference between the design in terms of IP, the difference between a design, a process for producing that design, and then the tangible product that actually comes out at the end. I think one way to ask that question is a lot of times if we've got students who are trying out something like using a 3D printer, you know, the first time they use it, they're probably not going to design something. They're going to go find a file online and then just print it out just to get that that experience with just seeing how the technology works. They come to us with a file, they plug it in, they print it, kind of the same IP situations that libraries who've always provided photocopiers have kind of dealt with, that, hey, the person using the copy machine is more or less responsible for making sure they're not infringing by photocopying an entire book and then trying to turn around and sell it. That's kind of up to the person using the machine. But are designs patentable? Are processes patentable? And tangible, of course, we know tangible products are, but what are the differences between those three things? Since once we're dealing with stuff like 3D printing, you know, laser cutters, when we're talking about individuals using the devices instead of an entire factory being built somewhere, now individuals are part of the design, they're part of the process, and they're part of the final product.
Yeah, so yes, patents actually do cover both process as well as products. So we have a cool video actually from our basic series that speaks to that, and the case study they give is building a better mousetrap. And so, you know, some might come up with a new product that will help capture the mouse, but there's also the process of how that mouse is captured, and that can also be, you know, written into a patent and considered intellectual property. So yeah, there's a cool video that we have. It's called "Can I Patent That?" And we watched the end of that video, but there's another portion of it as well that speaks to that. And then in terms of design, that would be more in, well, you know, there are design patents. So an example of that would be the rounded corners of the iPhone. That's not utility, so it wouldn't be a utility patent, but that is a functional design that that Apple has been able to patent. So design, you could look at it in terms of patentability, and also design in the space of copyright or even trademarks. So yeah.
Yeah, that rounded corners thing was definitely a huge news item many years ago when that came up, and it is interesting to see the different people weighing in on the, you know, we think of it, it's absurd that just cutting off the corner and rounding it would be patentable, and yet that really is a distinctive feature. You see that rounded corner and you know what product you're talking about, so it does make a difference to their business model.
Right. Yeah. And design is such a key aspect nowadays of value, you know, like the different smartphone brands and the utility, it could be, you know, very much the same, quite similar. But the design functionality that has, you know, shown certain leaders in the market as opposed to those that don't have that, you know, sleek design or new design. So that's kind of a cool topic as well.
Do you think maybe that opens up more possibilities for people who might not typically think of themselves as inventors or innovators, even especially in what we talked about before with people from different racial backgrounds or different genders, where they might have thought, well, I'm not a science person, or, you know, my school just wasn't very good. Their math programs weren't very good. I didn't get quality education. I didn't have access to a really complex physics lab because my school didn't have the funding for it. Style kind of opens up a possibility for people who might not have been in the process before to come up with an innovation that people who are locked in a lab all day trying to perfect the mousetrap would not maybe have thought of.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Rochelle, I don't know if you maybe want to take this one as well, since I know you have more of that creative background.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, I think that question kind of reminds me of our presentation that we had recently with Dave Kapos, who was a former director at USPTO. We had a presentation at the NACE conference, and one thing that he talked about was this idea of keeping it simple, right? Like when you're an inventor, there's this idea that, oh, I have to have like this, you know, over the moon idea, but a lot of times the things that are patentable are these very small sort of, you know, inventions, these small sort of knickknacks, these kinds of things that end up, you know, maybe it's just a type of wheel for, you know, something, you know, useful like that, nothing too big. And those are the ways that in which an inventor can sort of get their foot in the game, so to speak, instead of this sort of over the shot ideas. And so I think that presentation was definitely, that's one presentation that we're actually going to be putting up on our website once we get that recording, because I think it had a lot of great insights about, you know, this idea of starting small as an inventor and not necessarily, you know, being in a lab, as you said, and just sort of starting small and then working up from there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree. And aspects of design or creativity that might not necessarily be hard science, you know, the hard sciences that you think about in terms of IP and patents, but create value for consumers. And so, yeah, we see a lot of that that focus more and more, especially from a young age.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because though, based on what Rochelle has said, also I'm thinking back to my own childhood, and I was really good at math and science very early on, and so I was tracked into the gifted and talented program in elementary school. And yet I remember getting into the gifted and talented program, and then a lot of the things they wanted us to do were these projects and creative things. And there was this assumption, and I think this is very typical in the 80s, there was this assumption that smart kids are naturally creative. You're smart, and smart was defined as, you know, good at math and science and testing, and therefore you're creative, so we're going to put you in the class with the creative kids. But that definition of creativity really was kind of prejudicial on, you can test well, therefore you're smart, therefore you're creative, therefore we're going to pour more time and resources into developing you. And honestly, when you handed me construction paper and scissors and told me to create something, I really would rather have just done more math. I think it was kind of a mistake in some ways. I can think of classmates who were far more creative than I was, far more innovative, far more able to look at something in a different way. And just because I was good at testing and math, I got put in a creative program, and the education system kind of catered to me. But I think there are other kids who, if they had been developed the way I was, they would have far exceeded any kind of creativity that I had.
Yeah, I think that definitely speaks to also how students see themselves, and how that that kind of reflects what they see as valuable or maybe protectable. Yeah, there are a lot of you know, creators that are coming up with amazing innovations, but they might not necessarily see themselves as an innovator or have that confidence that you know, someone else in another field who's working on something, let's say in you know, the life sciences, might be called an innovator and might have external forces that are kind of encouraging them around their innovations and around the works that their discoveries and their works, but it's not always the same in some of the other or more creative fields. So yeah, that's a really interesting point.
Do you have a feel for how many people succeed at an invention that actually results in a patent or some kind of IP attachment, or maybe even later on a successful business. You know, we always hear about Thomas Edison's multiple light bulbs and all the attempts to build a better mousetrap. But you know, how many, I don't know if failure is the right word, because innovation includes iteration and experimentation, but how many people can come up with something that they actually can successfully translate into a patent? How many patent applications, another way of asking the question might be, do we know how many patent applications are simply denied, you know, annually?
Oh, Rochelle, I don't know if maybe you remember the statistics around this, but I do know that most patents, the large majority of patents, are unsuccessful in that they never make any money, never generate any revenue. And there's also this cool stat that I want to say it's half of all inventions are accidents. And yes. Michelle, you might remember.
Yes, half of all inventions happen by accident. Yeah, that was a stat that we had come across. Yeah, which totally makes sense. It speaks to how design works, right? And imagination. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So, how much then does business sense play into that success? How much of it really is this person came up with an idea, and as soon as you see that idea, everyone thinks, oh man, that was right in front of me. I should have thought of that first. I should have been the one to come up with that. How much of it is really the genius of the idea, and how much of it is the business sense, the process approach, the project management, the ability to really step through that process to get there?
Yeah, that's the question. I think that's a great one too. I mean, it really comes down to product market fit, right? So, just back to that video clip that we saw earlier, they mentioned, and even what Rochelle had mentioned around the keep it simple. So, how many, great innovations of science and technology are out there, but really one of the best inventions of the past few decades, people are looking at the coffee cup heat sleeve. That's just an amazing example of low tech, but great design and product market fit, as well as with the zipper that we saw. So I'm always really fascinated by those things, which should be considered, works of creative genius and innovations in their own right, but they might be keeping it simple, they might be more low tech, and I'm always just really interested in that perspective.
I'm curious, what kind of data do y'all keep? What are the success metrics that you use to evaluate your programs? Talk to both the curriculum that you have online that you've shown us, and maybe some of the community projects or involvements that you have. How do you know that what you're doing is working, and what are the things you look at to determine where to shift your attention in order to keep developing this idea?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that definitely the surveys that we do, we had our first pilot project with NACCE. We did a survey of all the students that were involved. I think it was 1,500 students in that first pilot. And one thing that really helped us was just around hearing their response to the curriculum. And, a stat that always sticks out is that 70% had never been exposed to the topic of intellectual property. So that was huge for us in understanding these are, these are undergraduate students. 70% have never heard of these topics. And these are, students that are studying business and design and entrepreneurship. So that's a metric that we can look at and say, okay, well, there is a gap here, as well as, how they respond to materials. Do they think this is a topic that's worthwhile for inventors, for entrepreneurs, for creators? How many, folks, of course, are accessing the resources? I mentioned before, we have, over 17,000 have taken our online course. It's the first of its kind that's teaching intellectual property for a layman audience or for a non-practitioner audience. So that kind of helps us to understand, okay, there is, somewhat of a need here. There is a gap in the market. And yeah, Rochelle is also doing work around more surveying and I don't know, Rochelle, if you want to speak to some of that, but yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot that goes into us looking at metrics, and it's really useful actually with all the analytics tools that are out there now, Google Analytics, HubSpot, a lot of things that we utilize.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially when it comes to our own product and services offerings, having to make sure, because when this started out, there were certain things that really worked because we were just starting out. But now that we're at a point, we're almost 5 years into the program, we're having to look at different ways that we can offer IP education services, especially now trying to keep up with sort of the online learning environment that we are in now. So, we're looking at interactive videos, we're looking at, roadmaps to IP, how do people visualize IP as like a roadmap from idea to impact? And so definitely us, we're in the middle of putting together surveys and even look at our own Educator Portal and seeing how that can be have a better user experience for our users. And so definitely, I think, even for us, we're always trying to look at that product market fit and looking at our data to make sure that, the products that we're offering are actually making an impact, so to speak.
Tell us what would you say, and also what can you tell us that you think we, as most of the people attending this event, are makers or makerspace managers or are involved already in some way? What would you say to convince a professor with very limited student contact hours or a K through 12 teacher who is constantly racing to keep up with mandated paperwork, student objectives, learning outcomes that they've been given from their district and their state board that they absolutely have to do to keep their jobs? What would you say to them, or what can we say to convince them to stop and spend very limited class time or student contact hours to the idea of intellectual property? Where is it appropriate to introduce that, and how do we convince them? Is it appropriate for all classes? Is it only appropriate for STEAM classes? How do we start that? How do we convince them that it's valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I tend to go back to the idea of the new economy and even the idea of the future of work and what that's going to look like. I shared earlier some of the stats around that. We see 80% of the value of our corporations today in the U.S. are in intellectual property, and so why is that? And how does that speak to what the future of work is going to look like, what national competitiveness is going to look like, and also for individuals to understand that their intellectual assets, their thoughts and ideas and creations do have value. And just to introduce that topic, I know that Rochelle mentioned we have a full course at the University of Southern California. It's called the Entrepreneur's Guide to IP. And, there's a full 2-unit course dedicated to that in their Center for Entrepreneurial Studies. But, a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of us don't have that kind of time to dedicate to this topic area. And so just that basic introduction of this is an essential part of our economy, but it's intangible. It's kind of behind the scenes. And so just, I think, planting that seed of the value of ideas and yeah, I think just that the value, that aspect is just really important. And even if it's, like I mentioned, a half-hour presentation to introduce some of the underlying concepts, and maybe those that are really curious can go ahead and use the resources to learn at their own pace, or just keep it in the back of their mind, know some of the basics when they might be working on their own projects, and they could think back, oh, I remember learning about Creative Commons, or there are certain things that I can do to kind of make sure that I can protect what I'm working on, but also share it. And it's just those basic concepts, I think. Yeah, but Rochelle, if you have anything to add, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. Yeah, definitely.
I find that statistic so interesting, that 80% of the economy, that 80% of that value is in intellectual property. Do you happen to know how long has that been true? When did that change? Is that specifically just the rise of computers and internet in the 21st century, or did it shift even before then?
Essentially, I think over the past 60 years, the rise of semiconductors, the rise of computing power. Now we see a new kind of phase rising with AI. But we do have in our Educator Portal, our PowerPoint that I mentioned there has like a really nice graphic of the biggest new industries of the past 60 years, and then you can actually see how patents sort of correlate with those. But yeah, I mean, Dr. Michelson has a quote where he says, when I was a boy, the value of corporations were in their assets. But when we look at the value of these companies today, I always think like Uber and Lyft, they don't own any cars. Airbnb doesn't own any buildings, and there's so many examples like that. So, there's sharing economy. There's kind of, the power of technology and where that's leading. And, even things that we mentioned like design, when several companies are making the same gadget, making a similar iPhone with the same, utility, then what is the value of design in, just getting consumers to decide and make their purchases based on that. So it's a really interesting topic, I think. Like a lot of theoretical, a lot of theory, I guess, is involved in that as well. But yeah, we definitely see that shift in the economy. And I think when you look at the startups and the new companies that are in the marketplace now, you can see the difference of what those companies were 100 years ago and where their assets lie. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and also to add to that, going back to our presentation with Dave Kapos, he sort of talked about, this idea of like coding and because software is so important in today's economy, and what is a source code, is that patentable or is that a trade secret? And he sort of touched on the fact that, for example, Google's algorithm they have it not as a patent but as a trade secret, because a trade secret lasts longer, so to speak. And so these kinds of things now in this new economy where things are more software, digital based, and I think they're going to be coming out with the Google versus Oracle case that's going to be decided soon, that will also kind of determine the copyrightable ability of a source code and encoding and all that kinds of things. So the IP is still definitely going to play a role in our new economy for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm already taking away from this conversation, which has been really good. I'm already taking away from this kind of a helpful reminder, actually, interestingly, to make sure I'm not repeating the experience I shared from my own childhood, because I run the 3D printing lab on my campus, and which we're developing into a makerspace, and there's just so much where we tend to focus on the machines, the science, the equipment, and I think what y'all have just said is a reminder to be more mindful of where we're putting our resources and not getting as stuck on machines or producing products, but having design, having other kinds of creativity. We had a session yesterday that was on interactive fiction, developing story, developing that kind of content, developing art, as well as elements of style as well as coding. And I think that, not to harp on it too much, but I think that goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier with regard to equity. When you have, since I'm at the college level, if I have a student who's entering college and maybe their high school just didn't have any really good science programming, or their math instruction was not good enough, and they're what we would call below level for math or science, that doesn't mean they can't sit down and use some of these modular programming, teach yourself programming functions, where instead of having to write out all of the complicated statements, they're grabbing chunks of code and seeing how they're designed and put together. I just think that's something that everyone who runs a makerspace or works in the maker community might need to be more mindful of. Is, hey, so much of the future of the young people we're developing is in creativity and design, not necessarily invention or production. So I've actually really appreciated this conversation, because that's something that I need to keep in mind as I develop my own makerspace.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm also curious to hear from you, like your students, what, if anything, is their relationship to intellectual property? What do they understand about IP? You know, from what you understand, do they know about patents and trademarks, or are they very pro open source? Or yeah, I'm kind of curious to hear what you've been seeing from your 3D printing lab and other work.
I would say that in our particular situation, I would bet most students, if I were to say who knows anything about IP, I might get a few people guessing that I'm talking about their computer's IP address, but I don't think anyone would come up with the phrase intellectual property at all. I think, and that's why I really like the comment one of our attendees made about working that into our existing information literacy, academic research, plagiarism. We're already approaching that idea of proper attribution, fair use, authorship, ownership. But yeah, I think for right now, the students are still just kind of excited to get to try out a new technology that they haven't been exposed to before. But that's why I'm really excited about this conversation, and I'm taking a lot of these ideas, and I hope to apply them in my own makerspace. It looks like we're about to be out of time, so if there are any other questions from the audience, hurry up and type them in now. Jelani, Rochelle, do y'all have any closing comments you'd like to add?
Well, we have our last slide here. So, you know, please take a look at our website. You know, we have a LinkedIn as well. You can kind of stay engaged with us there. And I hope that the materials are useful. Please feel free to reach out. You have our email addresses there if you have questions, or, you know, just want to chat more to any of these topics. And it's, you know, we are really, really excited about our interactions with the makerspace community, the maker movement in general. And so, yeah, we want to learn more about what needs you all have in, you know, the teaching IP or the presenting IP concepts to your communities. So yeah, please reach out, and thanks so much for having us at TCC MakerCon. And Michelle, any comments from you?
Yeah, I echo those sentiments. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that this makerspace it might seem a bit counteractive to IP, but there's definitely still ways that you can at least have the knowledge about IP, and hopefully our product offerings and services and curriculum can help you and your students along the way in incorporating whatever they might need to arm themselves with that knowledge going forward. So thank you so much for having us.
Wonderful. Thank you both for joining us. It was a really great conversation. We have a lot of attendees from a kind of a wide variety of backgrounds, so I think everyone will, from education, their own makerspaces, some even have their own side businesses. So I think a lot of people will take a lot of information from this. I do want to go ahead and remind everyone again that at 2 p.m. Central, we'll have our closing networking activity. where we'll announce the winners of the Apathon and close out the TCC MakerCon. We're closing out the sessions, but we're not closing out the conversation. So the slide decks from this week, these recorded sessions will be posted to our team, and we invite everyone, presenters and attendees alike, to join in that conversation into the future. Thank you all very much for being here.